Indian Hills has a rich and treasured history. I've documented stories of families that have loved this community for decades, leaving behind a rich legacy. This year, I wanted to address former residents who have left behind legacies that aren't shared in the conventional way. I lived in Indian Hills for 7 years in the sweetest old cabin. It was built in 1928 by the Hanson family. They owned a landscaping company down in Denver. They built the home themselves and would visit in the summers and have their entire family come up for long weekends. Since the neighboring property was owned by an uncle, epic family campouts ensued. The family told stories that often they would have the entire property filled with tents and enjoy the company of friends and family in the yard throughout the summer. As the years progressed, the youngest child in the family, Lola, often called Lolita as a little girl, decided that her and her mother would live there year-round after her father had passed. Her mother passed on, and Lola continued to live in the house into the 80s, doing updates and building a sleeping cabin in the rear of the house and improving the rock wall out front. Lola was a beautiful woman who was always put together and dressed in the latest fashion. She never married and worked at a bank down in Denver until her retirement. She lived in our home until she passed. When we purchased the home, we decided that it needed updating as it had the original bathroom and kitchen cabinets. During the renovation, we took out walls, added structural beams, updated the bathroom and the kitchen. We did keep the amazing wood floors, stunning fireplace, old doors, and my favorite, the original cottage-style windows, in an effort to keep the integrity and charm of the cabin intact. Shortly after the 6-week renovation, we moved into the home. We had 3 young kids at the time and 1 on the way. There was rarely a dull moment, and we were still working on more projects around the house. Within a few weeks of moving in, I started to experience some interesting occurrences. While sleeping one night, less than a month into moving in, I was woken up by the very distinctive sound of the door on the lower level being opened and slammed shut. Since we kept the old doors, this house had a particular sound as it was opened, and you had to jimmy it a bit, and when it was closed, the glass in the old windows shook. There was no mistaking that sound. Seconds later, I heard the sound of the old stairs being climbed by heavy footfalls. Each stair creaked no matter where you placed your foot, with each stair having its own distinctive sound. I sat frozen in bed with my heart racing, just thinking if I was going to be visited by a home invader or something else any second. Why I didn't get up, I don't know. Much later, I fell back asleep and shared the experience with my husband the next day. We didn't see any evidence of someone coming in the house, and obviously everyone was fine and nothing was taken. As time passed in the home, hearing footsteps throughout the night was a very regular occurrence, and on a few occasions, other people in the house heard it. The kids, as they grew older, would occasionally ask who was awake during the night, and naturally, no one from our family was moving about. When my babies were little, the first few years of living in the home, I often got the strongest scent of roses wafting through the house. It would happen out of nowhere. Think of that cloying scent your grandma would wear. I'd just walk into a room and it was like someone was sitting there with strong perfume on. This is when I began to suspect perhaps Lola was one of our frequent visitors. My favorite feature, the cottage-style windows, were also part of unexplained occurrences. These sweet windows were red and opened with a little metal handle from the inside of the window, and then swung open just like you'd see in a fairy tale movie. On the outside was a storm window that was installed in the 70s. I had 4 of these windows in the house, 2 in the front bedroom, 1 in the back bedroom, and 1 over the kitchen sink. You can imagine with these little windows being older, they took a bit of effort to open and close. On many occasions, I would find these windows open, as well as other windows in the house open. One winter, we were having a cold snap, and I kept going into my daughter's front bedroom and finding the cottage windows open. I would shut them and think when they got home from school, I'd remind her not to open the windows in the winter. This happened several days in a row. When I finally remembered to talk to my daughter about opening the windows, She looked at me like I was crazy. "Why would I open a window in the middle of the winter with snow on the ground?" she asked. Her shocked expression that I would even suggest she'd do something so foolish assured me she hadn't touched the windows. Now, the windows being opened wouldn't seem that big of a deal. Maybe the kids were messing with me, or my husband was just doing it and not remembering. Then, after wondering why I found the windows open all the time and just thinking it was somehow someone in the house, I gained proof. One morning, I left the house and it was chilly and I didn't have any windows open. Everyone was at school and work, and I had the two youngest with me. When we returned home, the kitchen window was open about 6 inches. This is a 70s style slider window and not easy to open. I called my husband and asked if he'd been home. He informed me he'd been at work all morning. Clearly, it wasn't the kids or my husband opening the windows. One other detail that's very revealing about open windows is how the longtime owner of our cabin passed. Sweet Lola was in her 90s and shoveling snow in the driveway when she slipped, fell, and passed away. Was she locked out of the house? Was she injured? Unable to get back inside? I don't know, but it seems that she was always trying to leave a way for us to get into the house through other means besides the door, especially when it was cold out. As I mentioned, we purchased this house and did huge renovation. During that time, I found nails everywhere in the house, the yard. Basically, every time I turned around, I found nails and screws. Some were very old, some new, big, small. At first, I just picked them up and threw them away. After a few years of doing that on a regular basis, I started collecting them in a glass jar in the kitchen. I would just pick them up and place them in there. Every few months, I'd look at them, see if they went to anything, and throw them away. After several years of doing this and finding them in the middle of the floor with only me in the house, I began to be suspicious that maybe they weren't just left over from the renovation we'd done years before. I recall finding a huge rusty nail that was 4 inches long one day right in the middle of the path to our front door. How could I explain that? Or the screw in the hallway of our recently vacuumed home with no one home but me? I collected screws, bolts, and nails till the day we moved out 7 years after the renovation. Several other creepy occurrences happened while living there. Given all that, I didn't think much of it. Was the house haunted? Maybe. Was I scared? Not really. We always just figured if it was anything, it was Lola watching over the house her family built, she lived in, died in, and enjoyed decades of fond memories in. When we sold it recently, I didn't really think much of the occurrences that happened while we lived there until I got a call from the neighbor asking if the home was haunted. I mentioned a few things about the windows and other occurrences, and after I heard her gasp, my former neighbor told me the new owners had been experiencing open windows, finding nails, and hearing footsteps at night.